We want to welcome all of you to our Decoding talk that we're really going to dive deep on how your modeling regimes are changing, specifically using EnergyPro for the 2019 code cycle. Yesterday we talked about low-rise residential, single-family, and duplexes. Today we're going to talk about non-residential, hotel, motel, and high-rise multifamily buildings. We are recording this session. We record all of our sessions, and we take the better of them, usually, hopefully where Gina didn't say any bad words out loud, and we put it on our website. Our last series we did was on healthcare. Occupancy I-2 is now covered under the energy code, and it's kind of a whole new world for those building types. If you do those building types, you might want to check in and see what's going on. We are brought to you by you, the ratepayers of California. We are funded by the California utility customers, and we are managed by the investor-owned utilities. You see all their logos there. And we are under the auspices of the California Public Utility Commission. And who we are is Energy Code ACE. It's a statewide codes and standards team that now goes by the name of Energy Code ACE. And we've got a lot of stuff available through our particular website. My name is Gina Rodda. I am the host for the Decoding Talk series, and I am an energy consultant and been doing this for a really long time. I really honestly, sometimes, Martyn, I look back and go, how did I get to be 51? How did this happen? Because I remember back in 91 when I was 22 and taking my very first energy code class from you in Nevada. Martyn Dodd is my guest speaker. Martyn, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. I've been basically working in the industry since about '83 when I went to work for Gabel Associates, and that was back when Mike Gabel was basically running things, and we got this grand idea that filling out Title 24 forms was very labor intensive, and thought, what a great idea. Let's write a computer program that would actually fill out Title 24 forms. And that's how we got to start with Comply 24. Eventually,
wow, computers existed back then?
Hey, you want to hear a great story? Okay. The software was written on an Osborne computer, which has, I believe it was one of the first portables that has a 7-inch screen on it. Okay, so I had to sit in front of the screen and write current software. And I think Mike told me he's still got it up in his attic. So someday I'm going to talk him out of that. So yeah.
That is just hilarious. I was going to ask you, how much is that computer worth these days?
I know. So anyway,
we're going to review with. Oh, sorry, Martyn.
No, I was going to say anyway. Eventually, it became EnergyPro under Windows, and that's what you guys are using these days. So.
In Windows, we'll see how much longer we have that, before it changes to something else. We're going to talk to you about the energy code changes specific to the 2019 code and how they may most likely have changed your modeling regimes. And we're also going to talk about some of the more common compliance choices or modeling regimes that we get a lot of questions about, so we want to kind of touch bases with you guys on that. And then we're going to link everything to the Certificate of Compliance forms, whether that's the NRCC per form or the NRCC prescriptive forms. And then we're going to follow up with making sure you know where to get training and extra help after today if you need a little bit more help after you go through this 2 hours with us. We're going to use the full 2 hours. We do not have time for a break, so I hope you came ready and locked in ready for this next 2 hours. But first, Martyn and I have a couple of questions for you. I would like to know, what role do you serve? If you do not see your role on here or you have multiple roles, please feel free to put that into the webinar chat. Throughout our entire session today, we are both Martyn and I are very actively keeping track of the webinar chat. If you have any questions or concerns, please do write them in at the time. Could you also let me know what you feel your skill level is regarding EnergyPro, just so we get a feel of who's in the room? And then my last question for you is, what is the relationship between CBEC-COM and EnergyPro? So, Martyn, we have a few more energy consultants in the room this afternoon than we did this morning, but still quite a few engineers, just like we did this morning. Welcome, our lone contractor. I hope you're going to feel like you're really getting something out of today and understanding how our building choices are affecting compliance. We've got all high-end users, Martyn. That's fantastic. So we're going to go as fast as we possibly can and dive deep. Martyn, what do you think about our responses regarding CBEC and EnergyPro?
Yeah, that's basically what it comes down to is we use the CBEC engine to do the Title 24 calculations. Now, in 2013, the Commission came to us and said, okay, that's the new way of the world. You guys need to use CBEC as your engine. Same with the 16 code. Interestingly, in the 19 code, it is actually optional for us to do that, but we feel it's the most appropriate way to go, so that way our results align with what the Energy Commission's doing in their CBEC stuff. So we're sticking with CBEC. Is what it comes down to.
I remember back when, depending upon what software you used, your forms looked differently. And yep. I honestly loved it back when all of a sudden, no, all forms out of all software, I don't care what you choose, is going to look the same, which really helped enforcement tremendously.
Yeah, well, back in the day, Ken Nittler had MicroPass, and he generated slightly, well, not slightly, actually a lot different CF1R than what we would generate. And that's because his was a DOS program, so basically it had 80 characters that you could fit on a page, right, when you print out from MS-DOS. We, on the other hand, were Windows, so we could do a lot more snazzy report and stuff. So they look very different.
I do remember when I didn't have to keep counting my characters every time I named an assembly or an HVAC system. Oh my gosh, I'm too old. Let's go back to our presentation and start talking about the why of why we decided to bring you in the room today and talk about this topic. So we have a new code in play, and there's a lot of new stuff, and I think especially for non-residential, it's really affected lighting and mechanical systems. So we're going to go through those today and how they're going to affect how you go about modeling. Our handout that we have for you includes the what's new from Energy Code ACE. We have both non-residential and residential in our handout. We also have a cheat sheet. This is something I developed that kind of goes through what are these new code requirements, and then how do we go about finding how and where we model those particular building features within the building tree of EnergyPro. We also have residential in there because we just did one handout for both of our res and non-res sessions. If you didn't have the opportunity to download this ahead of time, if you turn your eye to the left, you'll see Gina's favorite resources. Energy Code ACE, of course, has to be my first link I'm going to give you. Title 24 Part 6, this is where you can find the 2019 support on the Energy Commission's website. And then we also gave you the link to where you can find the list of approved software on the Energy Commission's website. EnergySoft, there's so many reasons why you need to make sure you have that handy as we go through this code cycle. And then the very last one is handouts, of which when you hit that link, a separate browser will open up and automatically download a zip file that will contain all of these lovely handouts. So Martyn, we're in the 2019 code cycle. What does that mean to how I apply it to my project?
So it's based upon the permit application date as to which energy code that you're under. So projects that applied for permit last year would stay under the 2016 code. And there's a significant advantage to that because obviously that code is less stringent. But as of January 1, permit applications from that point onwards would be under the 2019 code. And we expect the 2019 code to last into December 31st, 2022. And that's when we'll see the next code go into effect, the 2022 standards. But do keep in mind, folks, that you need to be very careful to understand what code you're under. I'm going to give you two great examples that just happened to me. Okay, first example, they said, hey, we went in for structural in December, and structural permit, so we're under the 2016 code. I said, okay, cool, that's great. I was just talking to a client that said, hey, Martyn, run this one under the 2016 code because the building department said, you know, you can apply all the way into January under the 2016 code. I said, really? Okay. So we ran the whole thing. We gave them the report. They came back and said, oh, you know what? They said we have to apply under the 2019 code. That's like, yeah, I'm not surprised on that because the cutoff date was January 1. So anyway, we're having to go back now and revise the project because we ran it under 2016. Now we've got to run it under 2019. So anyway, get a clear understanding and make sure everybody understands those dates.
I sometimes find, especially for my non-residential projects, that things look better under the 2019 software because some of the new bells and whistles we have available to us in terms of modeling. So some of my projects, I've looked at it and I showed it to them in 2016 and 2019, and 2019 looked more favorable. So don't always think it's going to be harder. With what we're going to be able to show you, what we have new to this code cycle, it might end up better in terms of your modeling choices. Reference ACE is one of my favorite tools we have available through the Energy Code ACE website. It has a digital copy of the standards themselves, the manuals that are written to support those standards, and the reference joint appendices. That's such an important document. What it doesn't have quite yet, and it will soon, is the non-residential and the residential ACMs. Martyn, why does this audience need to know what these are and how to use them?
So the alternative calculation method manual basically describes the rules that a software tool must follow in order to be certified for use with Title 24. In a nutshell, you can't just run any tool you feel like. Okay, it's got to be a tool that follows the procedures in here and has been approved by the Energy Commission. And there's procedures in here that you might say, well, wait a minute, why can't I do this and why can't I do that? Well, the reason is because that manual says you can't do that. Hey, I'm doing a retail project, and these guys are only going to be open 3 hours a day. It's like, nah. Retail is open 12 hours a day, and that's what's going to be assumed in the calculations. So you don't get to go in there and tweak things in that sort of fashion. And, you know, that's basically what we call fixed and restricted inputs in that document.
There are a couple of things that have changed quite a lot in this 2019 code cycle when we talk about our non-residential buildings, and that is our HVAC system mapping. For our smaller 1 to 2 story buildings, we'll see a big difference in how our fan numbers will look when we're trying to use single zone constant volume equipment. And there's also been a change regarding how we get the fan energy that we're being compared to in that standard building. And Martyn, I find between both of those, my smaller, simpler buildings, my compliance margins are blowing away what I saw in the 2016 code.
Yeah, well, that supports what you said about don't automatically assume it's doom and gloom if you're under the 2019 code. My project, I happen to tell them the good news is, guys, that I got to redo this calculation. But the good news is we do get to take credit for your VRF systems by doing it under the 2019 code. So I think it'll end up with a beneficial outcome for them.
So keep track on what's going on in that ACM, and you might want to beef up a little bit on what's going on, especially for mechanical systems. Here are a few of the locations on the CEC's website that we find especially useful. The first one being the CEC hotline. I always tell everyone to use the email so that you have a written track record of what was said and communicated. And listservs are the Energy Commission's email list. And the one that both Martyn and I feel is extremely important is the Blueprint listserv. Martyn, why do we think this is so important?
Well, when the Energy Commission publishes the standards, sometimes there's a few interpretations that need to be made on those standards. And they can't go back and rewrite the standards at that point and say, hey, you know, this is what we meant, et cetera, et cetera. So what they'll do is they'll publish the blueprint, and they'll give you interpretations and clarify things, et cetera, et cetera. And in fact, we're going to show you guys some recent blueprints that came out that gave very important interpretations to things like occupancy sensor-based ventilation. So it's really critical that you guys do get on that list and start to keep up to speed with those interpretations.
My favorite place to land when I go to the Energy Commission's website is their online resource center. They recently redid their whole look, and there's one big button here just for 2019. When I hit that, it's going to take me to that 2019 landing page on the Energy Commission's website. And very first drop down you can get to is to download a PDF copy of the manuals and the standards if you don't want to use Energy Code ACE's reference ACE. And this is also where you can find the list of approved software with links directly to that software. And this is where you can download PDF versions of both the res and the non-res ACM manuals that I highly recommend to all of those on this webinar who do modeling. So this is where we are currently of the approved list of certified software for 2019, and this kind of always changes, doesn't it, Martyn?
Absolutely, absolutely. Some software programs come into the standards, get approved. Some disappear from the standards, et cetera, et cetera. So, and also the version numbers. You're going to see the version numbers change as well. I know for a fact the Energy Commission's got a couple of new updates cooked up on CBEC.com, and of course we're following along with the same thing. And we'll have releases of EnergyPro 8 coming out. I believe there's an 805 that's going to be coming out in a week or two, based upon the changes they're making. And I believe there'll be another version probably sometime late March, thereabouts. So keep an eye out and keep your software updated.
And I kind of want to do a shout out here to what we're seeing under CBEC.com. There's a few things here that I always look at every time there's a new software version, and that's the Quick Start Guide, where it gives a nice overview of what's been changed in terms of what's been included and or fixed and or updated in the software. And because as we're talking about, CBEC.com is under the hood of EnergyPro, that's what you're going to be seeing in EnergyPro also. And Martyn, do you want to speak a little bit to the fact that if people have questions about CBEC, they need to send that email to the cbec.com at energy.ca.gov email address versus support@EnergySoft?
Yeah, and also another thing that we are trying to avoid here at EnergySoft, and I know you like to do it, is answering code questions. So if you want a code interpretation, hey, what do you guys think we should be doing here? It's like, look, you should get the answer from the Energy Commission hotline, because when you walk into the building department and you say, hey, the guys at EnergySoft said, they're going to look at you and go, so what? You walk in and say, the hotline told me this is the way we need to do things, then obviously that carries a little bit more weight. So we do encourage you to get your code interpretations from the Energy Commission. Get your EnergyPro answers, however, get them from us. Don't go to the Energy Commission and bug them with EnergyPro questions. That's not their job to answer those things.
Well, I do have to say, when people say Gina said, it does carry a lot of weight.
Well, I will admit the same thing, but still.
And I do have to say, I'm the primary person who answers the questions submitted through Energy Code ACE, which is another resource, which is why Gina has a tendency to be opinionated about code. Martyn, walk us through your software and where we're going to find things.
Okay. So here we have layout in EnergyPro, and you'll see described here the building. This is what we call the building tree, hierarchical description of the building, and you can get as complicated as you want with this building tree. No joke, I saw a guy build a hospital in version 5 of EnergyPro, and he had 1,024 zones, which was the limit at that time of DO2. I couldn't believe it. I said, man, that's the most complex model I've seen in my life. So you can do it. You can also do a 300 square foot addition to your office building and model that. So you can run the whole gamut. The one thing I will say, keep your models as simple as possible. Okay, I'm seeing people complaining to me because they're getting 5-hour run times. It's like, well, okay, you're getting a 5-hour run time. You've got your building input, and you've got 300 different mechanical systems in there, and 300 zones, et cetera, et cetera. So look for ways to simplify, guys. It's no fun doing a 5-hour run calculation, especially when you find it doesn't comply at the end of the run. Libraries. So we have
5.02%.
Yeah.
That's the one that kills me.
Yeah. Exactly. So anyway, on the libraries, we do try to keep the libraries current with the standards to reflect the higher efficiency requirements that are going into the newer standards. So those can be useful. And on the calculations, we're only going to talk about one calculation today in EnergyPro, and that's what we call the non-residential Title 24 performance calc. There's a total of 13 calculations in there. Gina and I were talking about the new ASHRAE calculation in version 8. That does it under ASHRAE 2016, which is used for LEED 4.1. So we're sort of keeping up with all the LEED stuff in our calculations as well. When it comes to reports, your main two reports you would consider for what we're discussing today would be either the prescriptive or the performance reports, or both. A lot of people don't realize that you can mix and match prescriptive and performance on a given project. And in the 2016 code, it was very typical that we would do projects where we would run the DHW, which is a simple little electric resistance water heater, under prescriptive, do the rest of the building under performance, et cetera, et cetera. So keep in mind you do have the flexibility to mix and match when it comes to compliance. Okay, we do have under file a whole bunch of example projects there for you. So take a look at that, and we've got probably about 15 example projects that are set up with the various VRF systems out there in the industry. That can be quite handy to be able to use those. So under the tools option, we do have the lifecycle cost tool there. So a great example of using them. I had a project where they said to me, Martyn, we're going to do a single duct VAV system. And then they say, hey, Martyn, we want to do a VRF system, but we need to convince the client that it's going to be cost effective. And you guys run a life cycle cost calc. Because you need to understand with these types of systems, there's not just the initial cost of the system, there's system maintenance costs, etc., that need to be factored into these things. So yep, that's what we use that for. And also we have under the help, we have contents. We have a great help system in there. Got a good person writing the help. She's been doing it for years for us, years and years and years. She knows the code really well too. We have the...
He and I used to work right next to each other in your old office.
I didn't realize you were here when Misty was here. Huh.
Yeah, that's where I met Misty for the first time.
Oh, that is too funny. Wow. Okay. Oh, well, Misty gave me a great picture. I'll have to show it to you sometime. Back in the old days. Okay. We have the EnergyPro FAQ. Look for answers there. Okay. A lot of answers you ask are already taken care of there. And the great news is you don't have to worry if we get back to you in 5 minutes or 5 hours. You're going to get the answer right there, right away. And on a weekend, it's especially good. Do keep your software updated. Help check for updates. We do have copies of the Title 24 documents here. We have the standards. We have the reference appendices. We have the non-residential compliance manual. So we've got a lot of good documents there also to help support your use of the software as relates to the standards.
Let's now go through your building tree. And Martyn knows for years, we at Gabel have been begging him to color code his software so that we knew what was applicable to everything, what was applicable only to non-res, what was only applicable to low-rise res, versus it's not Title 24 related at all. So I did that for you guys, and it's part of your handout. So if it doesn't have a color at all, that means that's a tab that's used for all 13 types of calculations. Orange means it's only being used for non-residential calculations, and that includes high-rise residential and hotel-motel. Green is low-rise residential, single-family, low-rise multifamily, and duplexes. Gray is something that is if you're doing ASHRAE or non-compliance runs only. With that in mind, Martyn, can you take us through your building tree?
Sure. Okay. So looking at the top level of the building tree, marked as the project level here, you're going to notice we have stuff that is applicable across the board. And for non-residential folks, you'll see in particular the Forms tab. We're going to talk about that in a little bit of detail. That has a lot of really important stuff related to documenting not only just the performance approach, but also documenting all the other forms that are available that need to be filled out. So I'd like to tell you, you just need to submit a Perf 1 and you're done. You've done everything you need to do. That's not really the case. There's a whole bunch of other forms that need to go in for a complete submittal. Okay, one thing I will point out to you guys over here, the PV and battery tab. That's a residential tab, okay? And that does not do anything for your Title 24 calculations. Title 24 does not, has not, and for the immediate future will not recognize the use of photovoltaics or batteries. So don't bother putting anything in there unless you want to do it for non-compliance or residential purposes. All right, the plant level of the building tree. Now we're starting to describe for you things like boilers, chillers, domestic hot water heaters, and we do have the ability to put several of those in. The next level of the building tree, this is where you can go crazy, putting in your systems. I want to point out to you guys that at the system level of the building tree, we offer a multiplier. So for that person that's putting in every single high-rise residential apartment and is putting in 300 systems and 300 zones, enjoy your 5-hour runtime. Okay? My approach, we use the system multiplier there, and we trim that down as much as possible, and we get our runtimes down into the 10 or 20-minute range. Okay, and same goes for zones, right? So you don't want to go crazy on the zones, otherwise you're going to end up with a crazy, complicated, takes forever to run model. So keep it reasonable, and you should be able to get reasonable runtimes. The room. Now, when we get to the room, you're going to tell me some important stuff here. In particular, you're going to be telling me things like, hey, what do we have as far as occupant ventilation requirements? What do we have as far as receptacle and process loads, etc.? And while you can go in and do room-by-room inputs, I try to discourage that because that, once again, does load up the run times. I tend to be a one-room, one-zone, a one-room per zone approach to that. But that's entirely up to you. I'm not going to tell you how to run your build, how to put your building models together. I just do find that the really super complex models do take a lot more time to diagnose when you have problems.
We're finding these days, Martyn, using our ventilation system as the primary way to go about organizing our building tree is
not a bad
idea.
Most valuable. Yeah, that's actually good advice. Yeah. So, well, let's talk about your building scope. We're up at the top level of the building tree here, and you can see there's various inputs here. The first one I want to talk about here is the building status. Let's just say, so everybody understands, your building is never existing. If your building's existing, then you're not in EnergyPro. You're not doing Title 24 calculations. Existing buildings are not required to comply with Title 24. Your building is either new, your building has an addition to it, your building is being modeled with the existing part of the building, plus possibly an addition, plus possibly alterations. Those would be the three choices you would use there. Okay, so existing is not something you would use. You probably ask me what is existing for. Remember, we do other things besides Title 24 calculations here with EnergyPro. Okay, how about the fuel available at site? Let's read that term again. Fuel available at site. Gina, does that say what type of fuel am I using in my building?
It's not about choice. It's all about
what is
options.
Available? Out in the street, I have a natural gas line. You have availability. Oh, but I'm going all electric. Okay, great. Good for you. Okay, you do have fuel of natural gas available. That's a choice you're making to go all electric. It still doesn't mean you don't have natural gas available. You say to me, oh, there's no natural gas out in the street. Okay, well, then you have propane available. Okay, you choose not to use it. I get it. You don't want to put a tank there and use it. But ultimately, those are your two choices. Now, people say, what about electricity? And last time I checked the physics books, electricity is not a fuel. So we're asking you one of two things. You have natural gas or you have propane available to you. I hope everybody understands the distinction on that.
And it's going to change that baseline building of what it's comparing you for your heating equipment. So do be cognizant of this because it will make a difference in terms of your compliance margins. They are working on having an all-electric baseline, not just for residential, but also for non-residential high-rise res and hotel motel, but they're still working out all the kinks. So at the zonal level, there's a whole bunch of new stuff going on, Martyn, and it's so important for this audience to understand the nuances of these changes.
Okay, so one of the things you are doing at the zone is you are telling me not only your occupancy, but also the ventilation function. You notice there's two choices here when you click that button where the green arrow is pointing. Okay, on the left side, from table 140.6 or section 140.6 in the code, And what we have here are all the different lighting occupancies. And as Gina has pointed out, they've expanded that dramatically up to about 75 categories. You're seeing all sorts of interesting stuff in here. There's not just a dining area. There is a dining area that is bar lounge. There's cafeteria fast food, family and leisure. Okay, so now you're distinguishing. We're getting a little bit more granular on that choice. Look down here, okay? We're not talking about this, but Gina does have a recorded session on healthcare and healthcare and hospitals in Title 24. There's all those functions down there. When you make your selection here on the left, you also need to make the corresponding selection on the right. And I had somebody contact and say, hey, my ventilation's wrong. It's like, well, which one did you pick? Well, I picked 0.15. What should it be? 0.5. Well, then I guess you picked the wrong one, didn't you? Because that's the ventilation that you are choosing to use in your Title 24 calculations. We don't choose it for you. You choose it based upon that list that's over here. And you can see there's a wide variation. A corridor in a retail mall is 0.25, but a corridor in a lobby there is going to be 0.5. So there's a distinction there. You make the choice.
This is also setting your lighting and your ventilation budget, so be aware it's affecting multiple things when you're picking these occupancies, and their sub-occupancies is kind of what I like to call them. Now that we did kind of an overview, let's dive in and really talk about lighting. So we're briefly going to go over some of the code changes that are going to affect your modeling regimes. So when it comes to track lighting and or modular lighting systems, we have a change in what the watts per linear foot are for track. They went down. It's usually we don't have things get less stringent. And this is a case of what it is, because most everyone is using LED lights on their tracks. So 45 watts per linear foot of track was just kind of grossly outrageous to what really was being used, and it's been reduced to 30 watts per linear foot of track. There are different ways of showing compliance for tracks, such as current limiters, and they got rid of the 12.5 watt per linear foot of track with a current limiter, and really just said, you know, what we really want to talk about is what's limiting the current and what is that going to be. So we have slightly different things we need to input to be able to get these to show correctly. And we have these new power adjustment factors. I like to call these control credits. And it's the very first time we're seeing that the envelope is giving us the ability to take advantage for a lighting adjustment that gives me some flexibility. So in taking, as we're moving forward in our code development and we're looking at our buildings as a whole environment, compartmentalizing our buildings and saying, I'm doing lighting only, I am not touching envelope, and I am not touching mechanical. Yeah, well, mechanical goes, I'm only going to do mechanical, and I'm not even going to look at your lighting. There's things being left on the table, especially here as we're seeing that there's a cross function happening between envelope design and lighting design. And we're probably going to see more of this, aren't we, Martyn?
This is an interesting section, because the section 140.3 dictates the architectural element, but the credit itself is achieved in section 140.6 under the lighting section.
So things to think about when you're wanting to look at how best to go about modeling your building and getting a compliance margin. Here are all the different areas associated with my building using the area category approach. And just like for mechanical, what you're not seeing is this is only part of the table. The table has gotten a little bit longer and a little bit more finite in terms of the different space types that are supported. It's part of that alignment we're doing with naming things very similar to how ASHRAE 90.1 is naming things. And what we're also seeing is this additional lighting power table. This was footnotes. We used to call it footnote allowances. Now they put it right next to the space type. I love this as a change in me going, okay, an auditorium area gets ornamental and accent display and feature lighting as long as that lighting is switched separately from the general lighting. And look at this. This is nothing to sneeze at. If I have ornamental lighting in my auditorium area, not only do I get 0.7 watts per square foot, I also get 0.3 watts per square foot just for that lighting feature. And I might even additionally have accent display and feature lighting, such as a monstrosity of a chandelier. Well, I can add another additional 0.2 watts per watts per square foot of that area for that particular light fixture. Additional lighting power allowances are use it or lose it. You don't get to trade it back towards your general lighting, but it definitely is going to give you that flexibility in establishing what your lighting wattages should be. And it's square foot of the conditioned floor area of the space. That's when we talk about square footage, it's of the space that we're modeling. So it's that auditorium area square footage that I'm looking for. When we talk about outdoor lighting, now this isn't something we're used to thinking about in terms of performance software, because it's not part of your performance software. It's if you are so deciding to use EnergyPro to also show compliance to your prescriptive requirements in code. And Martyn, catch them up to speed on some of these changes that are really going to change their modeling
Well,
regimes
one thing you're
for
going to have to
outdoor lighting.
understand is this concept of bug, backlight, uplight, and glare. They're basically triggering this now down at 6,200 lumens, which, you know, back in the day that was a lot of wattage, a lot of wattage on the fixture. But these days, with you know, the LED outdoor lights running 150 to 180 lumens per watt, that's not that many watts. You can probably trigger it at 40 watts. So they're ratcheting it down to much lower wattage fixtures on this requirement, and they're requiring that you take a look at Cal Green Part 11, Title 24 Part 11 Cal Green, and looking at the backlight, the uplight, the glare requirements, getting that rating from the manufacturer of the fixture, and determining that you are meeting that as a mandatory measure.
So this is, we're seeing a real connection between Part 6, the Energy Code, and Part 11, Cal Green, in which requirements for both of those building code sections are going to be integrated into the forms and into EnergyPro compliance software to be able to utilize the prescriptive form options. There's also control requirements, not just for indoor lighting, but for outdoor lighting. And this automatic scheduling control requirement is catching a lot of people by surprise. And if you are going to be that energy consultant or person who's going to be documenting the outdoor lighting controls, everyone has to be on the same page of how they're going to go about satisfying not only the automatic scheduling requirements, but the motion sensing requirements that may be associated with a lot of the light fixtures that are within 24 feet of the ground out there in that outdoor environment. Just like for indoor lighting, we see that the wattage allowances for outdoor lighting got reduced quite a bit in this 2019 code cycle. Martyn, talk to them about this asphalt versus
If we
concrete
take a look at lighting
issue.
zone 3 as an example, that would be an urban area. So I'm going to guess everybody here is probably urban. You'll see there that they are giving us different allowances depending upon whether that hardscape surface is asphalt or concrete. And concrete, in fact, gets a higher allowance. So most of our parking lots are going to be asphalt. Probably most of our sidewalks and pedestrian areas are going to be concrete. But that's one of these things you're going to have to make a determination, talk to the design team and say, hey, I see some drawing here of this little plaza area. You know, what's that going to be? And that'll determine what you get for an allowance.
Let's talk about modeling now for lighting and how things are going to look in EnergyPro for you. I'm starting always with our bits and pieces, our libraries that we're building up our lighting systems. And here we see a track lighting system. And you'll see those different options we just saw outlined in code, the standard track at 30 watts per linear foot. Thank you, Martyn. Our current limiter track, I use that one, I got to tell you, a lot more often. VA reading a branch circuit, I don't think I've used that even once, but Martyn, I thought I heard you say this morning you have been using overcurrent panels? I have come across a couple of projects where they do install the overcurrent panels. The industry has had those out for quite a few years, actually. There's one product out there, not that I'm supposed to name products, but it's the only one I know of. It's called the Silver Bullet. Go figure. Yeah. So here is where I picked my current limiter track, and I have my total amps of that particular current limiter, not all the current limiters on my project, but this one, which I might have multiples of, and also the current limiter VA rating. Now I find that you're not just going to find this on the lighting fixture schedule. I always have to ask for the cut sheets of the current limiter, and I'll usually have my clients go, Gina, we haven't selected that yet. I'm like, well, you're going to now, or we're going to put in a placeholder that's going to best represent your design so that when that contractor is picking out that current limiter, they do something that's in line with compliance. Are you finding that you're having any issues getting this this information
Well, in a lot
when
of
doing
cases,
track
Gina,
lighting, Martyn?
we'll say to them, you guys want that much track? Then guess what? This is what you're going to have to do. And we'll tell them to go back and find a current limiter product and get it into compliance. But we'll tell them, if you want that much track, forget it. It's too much unless you do a current limiter. It's an easy sell.
Yeah. Sometimes if you can't get the track to work, if we're using tailored method, it kind of depends on the space, but yeah, most often we're using current limiters. So here I'm showing you an example of an outdoor light fixture that exceeds the 6200 lumen requirement for bug, or what they're calling cutoff rating. Now you notice nowhere on here do I have the lumen rating. So this is, I'm someone personally, I put in parentheses in the name what the lumen output is so that it can link nicely to the equipment schedule. We're probably going to have our lighting designers start putting lumen output. They've kind of been doing that already. I got to tell you, Martyn, I usually see that for indoor lighting. We need to get them to start getting in the habit of doing that for outdoor lighting also. Can you walk them through how we're going to go about modeling
Absolutely.
these bug requirements?
So the reason we don't actually stipulate, hey, give me your lumens and we'll determine if you are going to be required to have a bug rating on your fixture, is because there are specific exemptions. I'm going to guess, Gina, I probably don't even need to look. I'm going to guess examples would be things like hospitals would have an exemption on something like that. But anyway, whatever, there are exemptions.
There are no exceptions for hospital lighting unless it's part of the pickup drop-off, the ambulance area. If it's a parking lot to a hospital, there are no exceptions. But there are some exceptions to this when we're altering existing pole lights depending upon their configuration.
So anyway, the point being, we don't know if it's required or not, if there's exemptions, etc. So maybe it is an ambulance pickup area. So you decide, you make the check the box, and then you're going to give me at the bottom of the screen here information on your exterior bug ratings. So things like what is the distance from the property line for the backlight? Okay, what is the backlight rating? That's the B rating on the fixture. There's a U rating on the fixture. Okay, I think it's B1 0 through 4, U 0 through 4. Okay, you're going to tell me the mounting associated with the fixture in terms of glare. So what is the distance from the property line? And then you're going to tell me the glare rating. And so the B, the U, the G, those are all captured there, and then that will be documented on the Outdoor Lighting Compliance Form, NRCC LTO-E. It will not appear anywhere on your performance reports, not in the slightest.
I have to tell you, finding the cutoff values of particular light fixtures can be very challenging. Some manufacturers are great about providing this information. Most of the manufacturers are not great about providing this information. It's not something that's yet required that all manufactured products provide this information, so it can be very elusive. We have found sometimes we have to have people change their light choice just because we cannot find the cutoff ratings to be able to document that they're meeting these Cal Green requirements. So there's definitely going to potentially be some more work regarding our outdoor light fixtures that are over 6,200 lumens. Now we're going to spend a little bit of time on the Forms tab. Martyn, walk us through this Forms tab.
So we actually have the majority, well, all 10 of the compliance forms that are required for Prescriptive captured in the software. You'll find this tab here is used for documenting the NRCC CXR commissioning review form. Mandatory requirement. There's another mandatory form you need to document, the electrical distribution system. I've got indicated here, or you do, the LTI tab. This is where I input information on the controls associated with indoor lighting. This tab serves two purposes. Number one, it documents on the prescriptive compliance form the various types of controls you're installing. And number two, it is set up to pass the same information over and document it on the NRCC PRF01. Now, it turns out right now that Perf1 is not actually spitting the information out. It's being handed the information, but it's not yet configured to document the controls. We are going to be getting an update from the Commission, and that update will eventually document on the Perf1 the control entries you put in here. So just for the record, anything you see here is not currently activated on the Perf1. Once it is, you'll start to see it populated there. Okay, so what are your control requirements for demand responsive lighting controls? Here's another one. The building automatic shutoff control. Is it done at the building level? Is it done at the area level? Okay. More. Come on. There we go. Yeah, it worked. Okay,
is it not clicking for you? Okay.
The individual area controls. And you can see there's multiple choices here. What type of area is it? What type of area control? A multi-level control, area shutoff controls, primary, secondary daylighting. I'll make you aware of this when you fill out the prescriptive form, the LTI-E. You can put 1,500 controls in here, and that'll all spit out onto the report. When we pass it over to the Perf1, though, it's only got the space on there for 10 different controls. So if you put more than 10 controls in here, you'll only see the first 10 show up because that's the software limitation on what they can fit there.
I want to point out real quick the exemption column. If any control you pick has an asterisk next to it, you'll have to explain, hey, why do you think you're exempt from multi-level control? And the form is not going to say you're in compliance. This is the prescriptive form, not the performance form. It's not going to say you're in compliance until you say something about that asterisk comment or control that you're using. Do feel free to be using those additional remarks that is documented quite nicely in these prescriptive forms. Martyn, I'm assuming that here, this additional remarks here is not going to show up in the performance form. That's at the
correct.
Project
there's
level?
no field currently for the exemption that you just pointed out on the far right on the first form. So.
That is a prescriptive form thing only, but it will make the difference between it showing compliance or not. Here's my outdoor lighting tab. Nothing is new here. You do need to make sure you have your appropriate outdoor lighting zone and that you've engaged it, that you're doing proposed outdoor lighting use installed versus use override. Martyn, when would I ever use override?
Would be useful if you were doing a calculation like ASHRAE 90.1. Because ASHRAE 90.1 includes that in the that energy component in the calculation, but the Title 24 calculation does not include any outdoor lighting. It's not on the documentation. It's not in any of the calculations. So the only purpose of putting outdoor lighting in is either for other codes like ASHRAE 90.1 or if you need to do prescriptive form.
So let's take a look at what we're going to be seeing here for the controls for outdoor lighting. It should look awfully familiar. This is very similar to what we see for indoor lighting. Here are your different choices, remembering if you choose anything that asterisk for the prescriptive, because this is only prescriptive now, it's never going to show up in your performance calc, must be included. And Martyn even says that here. You see over here where it says, selections with an asterisk must include text describing the reason for exemption. Otherwise, the form is not going to show compliance to your prescriptive calculation. Let's look at putting this lighting in actually to our building tree. Now that we've built it all up, we've got all the controls going. Here I am. I'm going to put my specific light into the space. Martyn, talk to them about these power adjustment factors and
Got it.
additional
So there's a
allowance
table in
categories.
section 140.6, I think it's 140.6A, and that's the power adjustment factors table. We gave you an excerpt of part of that a little bit back there. And there's all sorts of lighting controls you can take credits for. However, if you try to take credit for a lighting control that is listed in the table as not valid, then the software is going to flag that as an error. Let me give you an example of that. Let's say we say, hey, I'm going to do a new classroom, and I'm going to install occupancy sensors. EnergyPro is going to flag that as an error, say no can do. Why is that? Well, if you look in the standards, occupancy sensors are mandatory in classrooms. So we're not going to give you credit for a mandatory control, only ones that are allowed in that table 140.6A. And you can see those ones Gina talked about at the bottom there, the clear stories, the slats, the light shelves, etc.
Please promise me you're not going to use any of these controls for credits unless you truly understand what they are. I see that happen a lot. So make sure you're not picking one of these unless you've looked up in the code language what you just promised for the project and it is designed into the building. How about taking us through additional allowances, Martyn?
Okay, Gina showed you that table in section 140.6, the area category lighting allowances table. I believe that's 140.6C. Don't quote me on that. We did show that to you. There are specific instances where you get additional allowances. On the far right column of that table, she showed you those. These are examples of different ones you can select. Now, once again, EnergyPro is going to keep an eye on you. It's going to keep you honest and make sure you're taking a selection that's valid. So as an example, if you say, hey, I'm doing a corridor and I want to take an ornamental lighting allowance, well, if you look in that table, corridors don't get an ornamental lighting allowance. EnergyPro is going to say no can do. You need to go either pick a different function, like maybe retail, or you need to, lobby, there you go, good one. Or you need to pick an allowance that is valid for that particular space.
And we didn't really use additional power allowances in the 2016 code cycle because the lighting wattages were based on fluorescent technology and we had so much wattage on the table we didn't need it all. But now that they have realigned the wattage allowances to LED technology, I really think we're going to be using these a lot more often to be able to show compliance. But I also want to be telling people, think about this when you're doing your performance models, when you're indoor lighting in the conditioned spaces, because the more you put into what you're allowed to do in your baseline building, the better your compliance margins are going to be. So don't leave these off the table, especially if you're not complying by 0.02 and you could have been using additional lighting power adjustments. Well, then that's just leaving energy on the table, and we shouldn't be redesigning buildings just because we're not modeling it thoroughly. Here we have our outdoor lighting. We have different choices now for, I can't remember if I did this or not, the different automotive hardscape versus pedestrian hardscape. Nothing is new there. What is new is this concrete button. If you do not click this, it's going to assume asphalt. If you do click it, it's going to assume concrete. So you might have to break out, like Martyn was saying, your sidewalks separate from your parking lots just to be able to properly take into place what your allowances should be of concrete versus asphalt. You might have to break things down a bit more. Let's see what that's going to look like on the forms. So here's the very first page of our performance form. Now the performance form is going through a lot of updates right now, and I'm being told that it's going to look pretty different from what we're seeing right now in about 2 weeks. So some of the stuff is going to look pretty much the same. Some of the stuff is going to be expanded a bit. Some things are going to be really cleaned up. We're always going to have a compliance software version. It's really important we're keeping up on. We're using the latest and greatest certified software for our permitted projects. scope of work, making sure that's linking up to what you think it is, because it could really be changing your compliance margin if you accidentally modeled something, you know, as an addition versus new construction or an alteration. And then here we have all the project summary is, to me, so important to what is being included in the performance model and what's not included in this performance model. Martyn, walk us through
Absolutely.
this.
So in EnergyPro, you can specify what your scope is going to be. Okay, we've got a bunch of check boxes there. You can say, yes, I want to do envelope. Yes, I want to do mechanical. Yes, I want to do domestic hot water. Yes, I want to do indoor lighting. So those will get checked off according to what you have here, based upon what you select for scope. And as I said earlier, you guys can mix and match scope. So you're completely free to do that. We just had a project here I was talking to Tyler at my office this morning. I said, hey, let's just run envelope and lighting on that, and we'll sort out the mechanical under prescriptive. So that's the way we went, and everybody's perfectly fine with that. So choose to mix and match as you see fit. There's some other things we'll talk about here. We don't have a solar thermal water heater here. That would be in situations where you're doing multifamily and you're using a solar thermal hot water heater. But we do have options over here to include, well, they're not options. When you include in your calculations things like commercial kitchens, things like computer rooms, things like laboratory exhaust, that can go into the calculation as well. That's your option, however. Case in point, we just had a project last week where the engineer said, why didn't you include the commercial kitchens? I said, well, we figured we'd submit these under prescriptive, give these guys the NRCC PRC form and call it a day. Oh, no, we want you to put it in the calculation. Okay, we put it into the calculation. I called the engineer back. I said, oh, knocked it out of compliance. So I'm going to suggest we stick to what I originally told you and do it the way I suggested, which is do it prescriptively. That's entirely up to you guys, but I'm a big fan of doing the PRF, the PRC form for any of these covered process. So your choice, though.
I'm with Martyn. The process forms have a lot more support to, let's say, the control requirements and other things above and beyond just the fan energy. And I have a tendency to use the prescriptive or mandatory, no, those are all prescriptive, the prescriptive process forms instead. Here's now the second page that tells us about compliance, and you'll notice things look a lot different here. First of all, our compliance for energy code is in a different box from compliance for things that are outside of the energy code, such as above code requirements. Thank goodness that's all separated now. Everyone was using the wrong compliance margin with the old forms. And you'll see that the one for compliance, they increased the font size tremendously so that it really pops out. Martyn, what would I use C2 for? What is this above code qualification thing all about?
Well, as you're aware, there are a number of jurisdictions in the state that have said, you know what, the state energy code, what Sacramento is putting out is not good enough for us. We want better buildings in our jurisdiction. And so they've got above code ordinances that say, no, you got to do better than Title 24. So, it depends on the particular ordinance as to what they've got. And I'll promise you guys there's more ordinances coming out this year. So we're expecting a lot more ordinances from these jurisdictions. So what you're seeing down here are all the other energy use components being reported. What's missing from this table, which is kind of interesting, is that this table below will include, when you specify it, PV plus batteries. So if you decide to put that into your calculation, you will get that show up in the bottom table. However, something I found out the other day, Gina, when you do that, you'll get a big bold watermark says not usable for compliance. So in order to get rid of that, yeah, I know. I had this conversation, and there is a reason behind it. But bottom line is, if you do want to put PV in the calculation, then prepare two reports, one that shows it complies with the state energy code, and is it going to have the watermark, and then the other one where you've got the PV in there so you can show your above code scoring.
Well, that's what we were doing already, so I'm okay with that. Victoria's asking a great question right now. What is the Title 24 compliance score? 60.2% or 83.76? It's both. Martin, what's the difference between those two numbers?
So the percentage is obviously reported in the parentheses, and that's a percentage better than the standard design. The TDV number is the number that's outside the parentheses. And so if you take 139, subtract out 55, you're going to get 83. So yeah, if you take 83 and divide it by 139, that ends up being a 60.2% margin.
This was something that we're trying to emphasize. Previously, it had percentages for every single building feature or energy component, and that can sometimes get confusing. So because the percentages would look huge, but honestly, the TDV margin was small. So it's just a way of looking at the numbers a little bit differently, but that percentage is there for those cities such as Berkeley that would require 10% better if you're using natural gas at all for your building. So there's other reasons why we'd be using one number versus the other. Then we see here that nothing has changed here, our indoor conditions, lighting, spaces. So here's that high residential living space, Victoria. That is an option. That's what you would be using for your dwelling units in your high-rise multifamily buildings. And then here's my corridor spaces that are outside the dwelling units. Here I have my light fixture schedule. We'd want to make sure those match up as closely as possible with what we're seeing in the fixture schedule on the lighting drawings. There's a whole new slew of forms. Martin was talking to us about this. Martin, what's going on with this code cycle and how is it different than last
very
code
different.
cycle?
So everybody's familiar with the NRCC. Obviously, we've got a new flavor of it, NRCC FERC 1. We've got a new flavor of it, and it's evolving a little bit, as Gina pointed out. But something the Energy Commission did do is they evolved the other compliance forms, all of the prescriptive and mandatory compliance forms, into these 10 different categories. And so when you're filling out something like the lighting form for indoor lighting, there's one form. So in the old code, there was the LTI 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and I think there might have been 7, but I might be wrong on that. 6. Okay.
No, there were 6.
All right.
There's 6 total.
So you get the.
But there was like 38 mechanical ones. So.
So anyway, it's a consolidation of the forms. You guys need to get used to this new approach. A lot of people are still writing into us and say, "Where's the LTI 02?" No such thing. Okay, that's gone. That's gone. Okay, it's the LTIE. It's an all-in-one, and it's a consolidated form, and it's way better than the old system.
And building departments are still getting up to speed on this too. So do expect to get a few plan check comments in which you're going to have to bring them into the fold of these new prescriptive forms. Here's an example of the outdoor form that for this particular project. As you see here, it's the NRCC LTO-E form. And project table B, it's pretty across the board, whether it's performance or prescriptive, is going to be talking about what's the scope of the project, what's included. And this is brand new, table C. Martin, talk to him about how table C is important to these prescriptive
Every
forms.
single prescriptive form is going to have a table C. Okay, all 10 of those that I just showed you. And on each one, it's going to show the compliance results. And so there's a couple of things going on here, okay? We comply with the allowed wattages in this case, the allowed hardscape, general hardscape wattage. We comply with the cutoff requirements. We comply with the requirements for lighting controls. If any of those states we don't comply, then you need to go to that particular section, and it specifically tells you, okay, see table G, see table H, etc. Okay, the general lighting is over on table I. It's telling you where to find all this information to find out why you do or do not comply.
Then we have our fixture schedule. This should look and feel comfortable. It's what we have been seeing before in EnergyPro. This is pretty brand new. Martin, walk them through this table G.
Okay, so here we've got the bug rating documentation. And you can see in this case we're documenting the information on the fixture, the mounting height. We're documenting the B rating there. Okay. Sorry, that's the B rating. That's the allowed, so we're in compliance. That's the allowed uplight rating. There's our proposed. That's the allowed glare rating, and there's our proposed. So you can see in this example, we're in compliance with all of those components.
And we're in fact exceeding the requirements. It could be that equal number, G3 or less. You can always go with a lower number. Lower number is always sometimes a little bit harder to find, especially in terms of your glare rating. So Kim is saying this form is where looking at cow grain is important because that data is not in Part 6. You're 100% correct, Kim. I have to tell you, Energy Code ACE has a fact sheet called Mandatory Lighting Controls and has all of those tables from Part 11 integrated into it so that you can see Part 6 and Part 11 side by side and really send that to your clients so they understand what's going on in terms of the light specifications they need to provide. We see our outdoor lighting controls, looks very similar to what we've been seeing for indoor lighting. Now that we've gone through lighting together, let's ask you a couple questions to make sure we're on the same page. My first question, which of the following lighting locations are going to be included, if you so desire, in your performance calculation? And alternatively, which of the following lighting locations will require you to use the prescriptive method? I don't care what you did in the performance method. And at the project level, which tab are you going to use to support the prescriptive forms? Okay, this is how we can tell how many of you are multitasking. A lot of you are multitasking. Okay, I have at least half of you now answering my question. Okay, for this first one, Martyn, which lighting location can be included in the performance results if they so desire?
So the only one that is factored into the calculations would be lighting fixtures that are in conditioned spaces.
So for those of you who picked conditioned space, you are spot on. All the other locations are not something that's going to be included in your performance calculation. Yes, you might have modeled it in EnergyPro, but you need to know it's not going to be included in that NRCC perf form. Martyn, what do they have to use the prescriptive method for and will be on a separate form from the NRCC perf form always?
Any unconditioned spaces would be documented and on the LTI form, prescriptive LTI form. Any outdoor spaces would have to get documented on the LTO form. And optionally, but not required, you could document conditioned spaces on the LTI form as well.
But that's a choice, not a requirement. And Martyn, what tab are they going to use every single time if they use EnergyPro for prescriptive forms?
Always take a look at that Forms tab. There's a wealth of stuff that needs to get filled out to properly document the form work. And the form work is pretty intense. It's great. It obviously gives you all the information you need. Just a fair amount of information you need to make sure you fill out.
I have to say that in the past, Martyn, I didn't always use your software for the prescriptive forms. But now, especially with the commissioning design review form the way it is, knowing I can keep my file and every time I hit print, I'm going to get a refreshed version of the form and not keep separate PDF files floating around my computer, trying to remember which one is the latest and greatest, is really going to push me towards using your software more for these other forms.
Well, and the PRC we're pretty proud of. We're doing pretty much everything on the PRC, including compressed air. The only thing we're not doing is refrigeration as of yet. And that'll probably eventually come. But I doubt too many people are caring about that.
Let's go back to our presentation and talk about envelope. Not much has happened in envelope. It's been the third code cycle. We have not seen a lot of changes for the envelope. I'm hoping all of you don't expect that to stay the same for the 2022 code cycle. One of the biggest changes that's happening is how we can use the center of glass NA6 formula. NA6 stands for Joint Appendices Non-Residential Appendices Chapter 6, of which there's this formula that you put the center of glass ratings you get based on the cut sheet of very specific piece of glass, Solar Band 70 XL Clear, and it takes into consideration the type of framing you're doing. Is it single pane? Is it dual pane? And gives you a pretty average number of what to expect. We could use that for 1,000 square feet or less as of the 2016 code, but they reduced that way down to 200 square feet. I honestly don't see how I'm even going to use this except for maybe a few alteration projects where they're changing a few doors maybe. I just don't see how it's a viable option much after this code, in this current code cycle. Windows in demising walls, those are walls that separate enclosed unconditioned space, such as a parking garage, from enclosed conditioned space, such as, let's say, an office building. This picture here is showing an example of me looking out of my office building into my parking garage. This glass door only has to meet the U-factor requirements of the code and does not have to meet the SHGC or VT requirements. Tubular skylights, this is them relaxing code to help promote this amazing way of bringing in natural light into spaces. Martyn, what's different here?
So in the 2016 code, tubular skylights had, well, technically fell under the plastic skylight category, but now they're given their own category. And one of the things they don't have to do is comply with the SHGC solar heat gain requirement. And that's primarily because they're plastic dome products. And so to get a low SHGC and still maintain a really good visible transmittance kind of dictates that you need a low E coating. But sputter coating low E onto a metallic low E onto a plastic dome does not have a good outcome. So net result.
It just doesn't make sense.
Well, no, it doesn't. It melts the plastic. So you get my point. You can't put a low E coating onto the plastic. So as a result, they say, all right, let's not worry about the SHGC. Let's go after the VT so we can get lots of good natural daylighting in the space.
And what this means to us is, for those of us who have been using these tubular skylights all along, I know I have, I've been taking a pretty big hit in my performance calculation. Now that's not going to happen as much. Light tunnels that are glass, well, those are considered skylights, Kim, and I don't think I know of any solar tubes or anything like that with glass versus plastic. Do you, Martyn?
No. They're all plastic dome.
Yeah. Okay, let's talk about modeling. We're going to start with our assemblies, and we're going to look at fenestration. And I'm going to have Martyn walk us through these different aspects of what we're seeing here for fenestration and what I'm going to use for center of glass, what I'm going to use for default, and what I need to use for NFRC.
Okay, so default, I highly recommend you reconsider using that in your Title 24 calculations, just for the simple fact that you'll get to the end and find your building doesn't comply. Simple enough. Center of glass, Gina's already talked about the limitation there. 200 square feet, and that's it. You're out of that approach on a site build. So this leads you towards the most likely candidate, which is an NFRC labeled product, National Fenestration Rating Council. Give me the U factor, the solar heat gain coefficient, and don't forget the all-important visible transmittance. That's a very important number to Title 24 compliance. And once you've given me those three numbers, we're kind of good to go.
Talk to me about the fenestration properties. How are those important?
So if you look in the Title 24 Standards, Section 140.3, the table lists three different types of four different criteria for compliance. There's a table in the table. There's compliance for something like a fixed window. There's a different compliance criteria for doors. There's another one for curtain wall storefront systems. I think one is fixed and one is operable as far as the windows go. So those designations dictate what the standard building is using in the energy budget. So what you should be doing is you should be distinguishing here in your building between the different fenestration types that we describe. And of course you see the skylights there as well, right? So the skylight tables also have distinctions based upon whether it's with a curb, plastic, glass, etc. Okay.
How about the door automatic closer and this operable checkbox button over here to the right?
Sure. So there's a distinction in that table in 140.3, and the distinction is a window operable or is it fixed? And so that'll tell us which you get compared to in the budget. In the code, prescriptive code, they do have a requirement for, God, I've still got it stuck in my head. Gina, tell me the one.
Window door interlocks.
Thank you. Window door interlocks. I really have it stuck in my head, that ventilation checkbox. Ventilation control checkbox. It's now thrown my whole game off. Okay. So there is that requirement in the code, but that requirement is not triggered if your door has an automatic closer on it. So we're checking the box there to say, yeah, we're okay. We've got an automatic closer, so we don't need the interlock to the HVAC system. We don't have to meet that requirement.
The operable checkbox is part of the window door interlock issue also. If you have this checked off, then the compliance software, if it's a non-residential building or a hotel motel building, is going to assume in the baseline building window door interlocks between the HVAC system and or the controls in the space for that zone. And if you don't have window interlocks modeled in your building and your mechanical side, you're going to be taking a penalty for not providing those. In the 2019 code cycle, they removed the requirement for window door interlocks for high-rise multifamily buildings, but they are still in play for non-residential and hotel-motel buildings. Let's now look at our forms. So here we have our envelope. This is the very first table we see for envelope, and I use this one all the time just to get myself a sense of, have I modeled most of the building? How am I in terms of my fenestration area per orientation? And I always take a quick look at these window-to-wall ratios. And whenever I have someone send me a file going, Gina, I'm so out of compliance, what's going on? I always look here because, Martyn, what do we find here that tells us something about their compliance margins?
So Title 24 prescriptive requirements will give you an allowance of 40% of the total gross surface area of the walls. It also will allow up to 40% on the west facing. So when you look at the total here, which we see identified as being 19.5%, we can say, okay, we're okay as far as Title 24 goes. When we look at the west facing, we say 10%. We can say, okay, we're okay as far as Title 24 goes. But when those two numbers exceed 40%, either one or both, then that's when you're taking a significant penalty for that envelope design, in that it's got too many windows on it, and you'll need to rethink that if your building is out of compliance.
So it's a real great way to give you a gut check of what's going on with your envelope. Here we have our fenestration breakdown. Here in the certification method, it would either say NFRC rated or that center glass, which represents center glass NA6, and default. And in fact, if you can't remember all this, in the footnotes here to this table, it says all of this all over again. I get a lot of people asking me, what does COG stand for? Read the footnote right under the table. It's right there. I wanted to call attention just briefly to, in our performance form, and this is also in our prescriptive forms, that we do break out separately insulation interrupted by framing, which is cavity R value, versus insulation that is not interrupted by framing, which we call continuous R value. One of the exciting things we just saw is the CF1R also now calls out insulation this way, aligning our documentation between our residential buildings and our commercial buildings. HVAC, what is so exciting about VRF, Martyn?
Well, other than the fact that they're asking for higher efficiency models, which shouldn't be an issue, we can now model them in the performance approach. So this is big news. It's been a lot of years coming in terms of allowing the performance tools to model the VRF, but now we can model them. And I have to admit, I know there was some grumbling from the manufacturers as to the the details and whatnot. I have to admit, it's a very satisfactory outcome. The VRFs are looking pretty darn good when it comes to compliance. And I believe, Gina, you were saying you were doing some buildings where you were hitting 20% better than code, thanks to your VRF system.
Well, that was someone who sent me a file going, something's wrong, Gina. Something's wrong. I'm at 20%. How did that happen?
Exactly.
I ran the same building in 2016, and I was minus 15%. Yeah. What's wrong? And I'm like, it's right.
That's right. Yeah.
And I was able to verify it. I was able to look at the standard baseline reporting behind what it was being compared to. It was being compared to a package VAV, and the fan numbers for VRF are a lot better than they are for, I just said it backwards, I can't remember. So package VAV, the fan numbers are much higher than VRF, so it's getting really nice credit for that particular design choice. And there's even more fan credits we can see associated with our systems. We do have MERV 13 filters now for all new systems and all systems that have all new ducting. So that's something to be aware of. But what also we have, which is really allowing our mechanical modeling to really reflect the design, is these fan power adjustments. Martyn, how do I use these?
Well, the fan power adjustments are credits that are specified in section 140.3 of the code. There's a table there. And the general idea behind the fan power adjustments is you're designing a system and you get a certain fan power allowance. But because that system has something in there that is going to require additional fan power, let's take an example, it's got a fully ducted return, okay, then they're going to give you additional fan power allowances in the energy budget. It's not going to change the consumption of your building. It is going to change the actual energy budget that you're compared to. And it's definitely something you want to consider. Also, keep in mind, Gina, you put the MERV 13 filter up here. I want to make it clear to everybody that's a mandatory measure, and you don't put that into the software. It has a MERV 13 filter. That's already built into the fan power allowances. So it's only when you push the MERVs up higher to like MERV 16 that's when they give you additional allowances. Somebody asked me the other day, do I get an additional allowance from MERV 13? It's already built into the numbers. Okay? It's already there.
What I like about this is it's much cleaner for us to document these adjustments now. Before, it was this weird number, or what is the static pressure, water column, blah, 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 and you'd have to ask the mechanical engineer, give me a number. Now we have things that can be clearly documented that match up with the design of the building, and to me it still makes more sense. It's easier to do as an energy consultant. Demand control ventilation, these are CO2 sensors. We are going to be seeing more of them because the requirements for them have been expanded to include any modulating outside air control system and or any system that has outside air exceeding 3,000 CFM. These are not new controls. We're just going to see them more often. This is another control that's not new at all, occupancy sensor ventilation control. What is new is the code is saying in these spaces that I have lighting control occupancy sensors, and here's the list of it here, and in my ventilation table, it's allowed to go to 0. Now what that occupancy sensor ventilation control is going to do is shut down the ventilation when no one is in the space. So this is a pretty gosh darn new thing. And let's take a look at this ventilation table to see how about we go about determining if a space is allowed to go to 0 but with this footnote F. So there is a heck of a lot more occupancy categories. This matched up exactly with what Martyn showed you guys way at the beginning of our webinar as setting up the occupancy for your zone. That's also then setting your lighting categories. So there's a lot more now going on for ventilation. My mechanical engineers out there, I sure hope you're beefing up on these new requirements, especially for ventilation in the energy code, because it's a whole new game. Martyn, tell them why we think this is one of the most important blueprints people need to have on their hands when we consider occupancy sensor ventilation control.
Absolutely. So when the Energy Commission published the code, there's certain language that you'll read in section 120.1. And if you read it verbatim, it kind of says, look, if you've got any F-based occupancies that also have the lighting occupancy sensor, then you got to do this. And so that leads you to believe that, okay, if I've got a single zone system that's serving all these different spaces, and I have 3 F occupancies and one's non-F, then I kind of have to have the sensors in all the different spaces. That's kind of what it leads you to believe. Well, the clarification here is, look, if you've got 3 F spaces and then you've got 1 non-F space, then that circumstance you don't need the occupant-based ventilation control period. You may not get that by reading the actual text of the standards, but you certainly will get that in this clarification to that. So it's a very important blueprint for those of you that are doing mechanical design and modeling.
And I like that they just gave a few different scenarios. I really do think they thoroughly answered that question. Exhaust ventilation is now a thing. It is required not just for residential local exhaust. We have it for non-residential exhaust only. Also, depending upon the occupancy type, it's included on that table that we showed you. Multifamily, this is going to apply for both low-rise and high-rise. This is the first time we're really seeing an alignment of low-rise and high-rise ventilation requirements, not only for the ventilation rates, but the ventilation requirements and other indoor air quality requirements. Martyn, walk us through this.
Absolutely. So one way to provide ventilation in this situation, and this is probably a fairly common scenario that people have been doing over the years, is to simply put in an exhaust fan and pull air from wherever it comes. So yeah, that's not the greatest, not the greatest approach. The second one is a little bit better, and that's to pull air from the outside and supply it into the space. Obviously, that requires the MERV 13 filter that we talked about, and that does put the unit at positive pressure. So the third approach is what we call a balanced ventilation system. Now, in the case of the balanced ventilation system, we are at neutral pressurization, and we are providing ventilation into the unit, taking ventilation air back out of the unit, and basically the HERS rater is doing tests on all three of these circumstances I'm describing here, which is new, and they will verify if we comply. And in the case of the balanced ventilation system, they will make sure that the amount of air and the amount of air coming in and going out is within a certain threshold. I don't remember what the test criteria is as far as how they have to match, but I'm sure it's some percentage threshold there. But one of the things you need to be aware of as you go down the path of multifamily ventilation is the requirement for a blower door test on all the dwelling units. So if you go with a balanced ventilation system, you get a pass on this one. You don't have to do it. You don't have to have the HERS rater blower door test the units. But if you go with the other ones, exhaust only or supply only, well, guess what? You're going to get the surprise of having a HERS rater come out, and they're not only going to test the ventilation systems, but they're also going to do a blower door test. What concerns me about this is the stage of the project at which this occurs. So how many projects do you see where their last minute thing is, hey, you need to get your HERS inspections? Okay, so here we are. The real.
Well, my thing is these buildings aren't even used at all to dealing with the HERS rater, so this is a whole new thing, period.
Yeah. Well, let's take a 40-story tower. I'm doing a new condo tower in San Diego. I was speaking to some HERS raters. I said, you guys are going to have some fun testing these things. But, the point is that, the real estate agent is standing outside, and they've got all the lease contracts, and everybody's ready to move in. HERS rater shows up and says, hey, the first unit I tested failed, so I get to test the second unit. Second one failed. Okay, now we have to test all 7. They get to test 1 in 7. If 2 out of 7 fail, they have to test all of them. Well, okay, now we're doing some more testing here. Better get a big crew in, because you got 200 units I got to test. Okay, here's a fat bill for all the HERS
And it's going to take me a week.
Right. And, thank you. Now, since they all failed, you guys call me back, and I'll come back and do another 200 tests, and once you fix all the problems. Well, Mr. HERS rater, how do I fix the problems? Well, probably tear the drywall off in all the units and go in there, seal up all those penetrations that the plumber left, that the electrician left, that the HVAC contractor left inside the walls, get everything tightened up, and then we'll come back and do the tests. Well, that's not going to be a very...
And hope you pass. We're just really concerned that people aren't prepared for what happens in a fail. I do have a lot of projects that do lead for homes, and they have to do the blower door testing already, and they feel very comfortable with what their numbers are with their contractors. We have to ask, hey, have you done this? Do you know what this is all about? Are you aware of what your buildings might be? Otherwise, you might want to do a balanced ventilation system. Martyn, talk about these other not permitted as a ventilation source issues.
Thanks. And Kim, I know what you're saying. This speaks to better team coordination from an early part of the design. I've literally had mechanical engineers say to me, no, we're going to put in the exhaust system. That's the cheapest solution, and that's what the owner wants. If the building's leaking, that's the contractor's problem. So yeah, there's your team coordination. Operable windows cannot be used for this purpose. You can't use the operable windows as a source of your ventilation, and nor can you use the forced air system. So I had a project the other day. They said, we are going to go into VRFs. We're going to duct each of those VRFs to the outside, and that's how we're going to provide our outside air. I said, you're not doing that in the 2019 code. The 2019 code says you can't do that. You have to put in a specific ventilation system here that is independent of the forced air system that will provide this functionality. So things are changing in this particular segment of the industry. And also they want testing on the well, not testing, excuse me. They want verification on the range hoods. So once again, HERS raters normally don't go into these occupancies and do these things, but in the new code, you will have to get a HERS rater in to visually verify the particular model of hood that has been installed, compared against the HVI directory. Now, for those of you preparing Title 24 calculations, you're probably thinking, oh, we got HERS now. That means the certificates of compliance need to be registered with a HERS provider. No, they do not. Okay, the only forms that need to be registered are the ones in the field that are filled out by the HERS rater. And that's the NRCV MCH32H. Your forms do not have to be registered with a HERS provider.
But now we just saw with our multifamily buildings, we have a HERS rater that's going to be out there for at least 2 things at every single dwelling unit, and potentially a third depending on how they do their ventilation system. So a lot more HERS rating. Well, for the very first time, we're going to see HERS rating for every single multifamily building and every single altered multifamily building that has new kitchen hoods and or ventilation systems. There are new requirements for laboratory and factory exhaust systems. As we talked about earlier, yes, you can do these in your performance calculation, but it might make a lot more sense to pull it out and do it prescriptively, but you could still use EnergyPro to model all of that and get that going in terms of documentation. So Victoria asked, is there going to be an example model from EnergyPro that I can look up all these VRFs? Martyn, what's the answer to that?
We have our sample files that are available to you. They're both on our website and installed onto your computer as part of EnergyPro. And we've got a whole range of different equipment manufacturers' stuff already in there. And so the manufacturers have been very good about keeping those libraries up to date for us. So check them out, and certainly I would encourage you to use those libraries as opposed to reinventing the wheel.
There's an example file for each manufacturer, so you're going to look for your particular manufacturer, and you're going to export. So this is where you're going to open up that sample file, pick the exact piece of equipment you want. Here are my outdoor units, and export it to your file. So you're going to have your file open so that you can export that piece of equipment into your file. And then you're also going to do this for your zonal equipment, because a VRF system has 2 components, an outdoor component and an indoor component. So you're going to do it twice, once for your outdoor equipment and probably multiple times for your indoor unit if you have different sizes of equipment for that indoor specification, which is very common. So taking a look at our central libraries, we're developing our systems. Really, honestly, really nothing new here, except for saying, please, when it's VRF, start with the sample files of that manufacturer. It's a much better way to get things started. We have all the choices that we've had before for both heating and for cooling. There's nothing new here, except for the fact that we get to use that VRF equipment that Martyn has had in there that we've been using for LEED or other non-calculation projects up to this point. Here at the system level, we're going to be picking the piece of equipment that we modeled. Again, nothing new here at all. You're going to be picking that equipment. What is new is this pressure drop tab. Martyn, let's go through this with them.
Absolutely. So at the system level of the tree, move to the right, pressure drop. you can put in optional devices that you have in your HVAC system. You simply check the box here, fill in what the airflow rate is across that device, and you will then get credit in both the prescriptive and the performance calculations. So this tab applies to both. And I found
Martyn?
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, we had a question earlier, and I thought I'd remember it while we were on this. Where do you get that CFM rate?
Well, it depends. For example, if it's a fully ducted return, then how much air are you running back onto that return? Probably in most cases, you're running, all the air back on that return. But on the other hand, you may have a situation where you've got air that's for a biosafety cabinet. It's a 4,000 CFM system. 2,000 of it is going into the space. The other 2,000 is related to the biosafety cabinet. So there's an example where you change that from down to 2,000. So you'd basically ask the HVAC designer how much air is flowing through that particular device.
And it is standard practice for this to show up on their mechanical layout drawings. It's something that they've been putting on there for years. We finally now get to use it. So this isn't a whole new game at all for our mechanical designers. What the whole new game is we get to use the information they're providing us.
So Gina, tell me where this appears on the NRCC Perf 1.
Is it not there yet?
Nope.
Well, I bet in a couple of weeks, Martyn, it will be there as they continue to evolve the performance form for these new code requirements.
It is on the MCH, the NRCC MCH prescriptive form. It's well documented there, but it hasn't made the performance form yet.
Okay, I'm writing that down, Martyn.
That's okay. RJ's,
just so I can double check.
RJ's taking good notes, I hope.
Okay, good. Okay, let's take a look at our zone level. And let's walk through a few things here. Let's start with our ventilation type. We'll see here we got our zonal VRF system input that I grabbed, that I exported from the particular VRF table. I have my VRF pipe length. And Martyn, tell them what's the trick about what number I put in there? Do I have to put every single system that has a different pipe length into 2,000 different zones?
No, when we're looking at each condenser, the question on the condenser is what's the maximum pipe length that we have? So if you had a condenser with 6 indoor units, then really we're just looking for what is the longest length of those 6 units from the condenser out to the indoor unit. So don't get too into the weeds on that one. That's the ultimate question that we're asking there. Oops, sorry. I did want to mention to you guys also on the zone ventilation. You have some choices down here. How are you going to provide ventilation to this particular zone? We're providing ventilation from the HVAC system. Okay, we've got a rooftop unit and it's bringing in outside air. We have no ventilation. Do not specify that. Okay, if it's a conditioned space, it must have ventilation. The only time you would use that is something like an indirectly or unconditioned space. Natural ventilation. You don't want to go there. Okay? Natural ventilation is not an acceptable modeling choice for any of your commercial occupancies. It's not acceptable as an option, as I just showed you a minute ago, for high-rise residential. And while it is acceptable for hotel motel, Gina, what do we have to do?
There's a whole new slew of rules if you want your ventilation method to only be natural and not be a combination of mechanical ventilation and natural ventilation. And to be able to use natural ventilation, you have to have that ventilation source automatically open and close when the space is occupied and throughout the entire time the space is occupied. So the only way I know that's going to happen is if we have motors or something like that. If you're saying the window is going to be the natural ventilation source, you have motors opening and closing that window that are connected to occupancy sensors. I just don't see many projects going that route. So really what we're saying is you're probably going to be using mechanical ventilation for most of your projects.
And another choice, which might be a more popular choice these days, is possibly ventilation at the zone level. So in this example here, we have indicated zone ventilation, which means we're going to indicate exactly what that ventilation is up here on the right. And in this example, you can see we have various choices. General exhaust. Okay, that's fine. Specialty exhausts, laboratory, commercial kitchen, parking garage. I gave you my opinions on those, by the way, as to possibly using the PRC to document those, but that's your choice. A supply ventilation system and a balanced ventilation system. Now, if we choose the balanced ventilation system, we don't trigger the blower door testing in the high-rise residential apartments. But if we choose general exhaust or a supply ventilation system, we most definitely do. Keep in mind when you do choose balanced ventilation, you get the option of adding in heat recovery. Now here's a great energy efficiency measure. Do a balanced ventilation system and install what's called an ERV or an HRV, energy recovery ventilator, heat recovery ventilator. Effectiveness, probably in about the 60% range. Okay, so you can get some excellent energy savings out of the building by not only putting the balanced ventilation in, but then also moving on to consider having the heat recovery.
What's also different with this particular round of software is when you're doing balanced ventilation for your dwelling units, we had to kind of do some crazy stuff to model those balanced ventilation systems in 2016 software. But now we're putting in one number that represents both supply and exhaust. It's not combined, but then let's say you have 5 different apartments and some are 50 CFM, some are 70 CFM. You're going to add them all up and divide them by 5 apartments to get the average that you're going to use that's going to represent both the exhaust CFM and the supply CFM. The watts that you're going to use are going to, and this is what I'm not 100% clear on, Martyn, is it both supply and exhaust or just exhaust and it doubles it automatically?
No, on a balanced system, you would put in the total.
Okay. And please don't use brake horsepower. I know that a lot of times I get fractional, FHP all the time and there's nothing there. I'm like, that means nothing to me, nothing. I'm excited because it tells me it's a small fan, but you need to give me the watts at design conditions at that lower setting. Let's say it's a 2-speed exhaust fan that's being used as part of that balanced ventilation system, and maybe I might have a DOAS system doing the supply air. I'm going to be putting in the watts. And I just did a project this afternoon at lunch. I convinced them to give me the watts for the supply fans, and it made a compliance margin swing of 10%. So it can really make the difference. We need finite numbers associated with our fan and pump systems. And Martyn, what's important about these 2 check boxes here?
Okay, so one of the things we're indicating here is demand control ventilation. That's the CO2 sensors in the spaces. And as you mentioned, Gina, there's a larger number of spaces now that require CO2 sensors in particular classrooms. The other one is the occupancy sensor-based ventilation requirement. That's that whole blueprint topic that we talked about here. Now, one of the problems here is you may get a message indicating, hey, you did not put in occupancy sensor ventilation, and CVEC says I won't run. And you might say, well, wait, I don't need it. I meet the exception here. Well, what you'll need to do is just go ahead and check the box anyway and just document in your submittal the fact that that's only there, but it's not required based upon blueprint number, whatever that one was. So that would be the recommendation.
I'm going to actually have us talk about a couple of these other check marks while we're here because we have high-end users in the room today. Here's that operable window interlock we were talking to you about when we were talking about fenestration, whether it is a door that does not have an automatic closer or an operable window. If it's not multifamily, if you don't have this checked, you're taking a penalty for those operable windows not having the window interlocks. If you have it checked off, well, then you're not taking the penalty. Hey, Martyn, talk about this one. I forgot that we should have really included this as what we're talking about as a code update.
Oh, have you looked at the meter in the top left-hand corner of the clock? We're going past 4. Okay, additional cooling. Okay, Okay, or add cooling. In situations where you are not, or you have unmet cooling load hours, you can check this box and the software will automatically add in a pseudo cooling system to make sure all of your cooling load hours are met. And so that's a new feature that's been added into the software. And basically in the background, it'll add a cooling system. So if you had a heating only space, say it was high-res residential, and you want to make sure all your cooling load hours are met, you could check that box and it will automatically add that in there.
Because unmet heating and cooling hours are now a thing in the 2019 code cycle. They gave us a break in the 2013 and 2016 code cycle. They wanted to have it apply way back then. Now for real, the 2019 code cycle, it is going to apply. So be prepared for that. And they've created that little button to help people go, I just want to get my unmet hours gone. I know I'm taking a bit of a penalty for a system that is not really designed, but it's meeting these unmet heating and cooling hours. What's important about our dwelling unit tab for multifamily and hotel motel, Martyn?
This dictates the ventilation requirement that we'll have. So the ventilation requirement in the new code is based upon the floor area for the dwelling unit, and it is based upon the number of bedrooms. So what you really can do here is you can add a whole bunch of items to this list by simply using the yellow plus sign there, and you can build this list up to define all of your 1-bedroom units, your 2-bedroom units, your 3-bedroom units, etc. And that'll take care of the ventilation calculations properly.
Let's talk about what we're seeing on the forms. So here we're going to start off with our dry system table. Nothing really special here. It looks exactly like it did before, but for the very first time we're seeing VRF there and the equipment type. So exciting. It really is so exciting. I wanted to point out here at this particular table, because it drove me crazy, I had to call the CEC and go, why am my exhaust fans for my multifamily units not showing up here? Oh, this is process fans only. So they are going to go and change that title in the next go round of the forms to make it clear to everyone else, because I know it really stumped me for a while. Here on my ventilation table, and this table is just so important, and really making sure that outside air CFM and is really showing up the way that it is designed. And here we see those demand control ventilation and occupancy sensor controls are going to show up. And at the zonal summaries where I'm going to see the fan numbers associated with my fans, this is those brake horsepower or watts. Strongly suggest you use watts, don't use brake horsepower. And it's going to make a pretty big difference to compliance. Make sure you look at these and it's lining up properly to the design. The form, well, the software, and EnergyPro has always done this, it's auto-populated what installation acceptance and verification forms are going to be needed based on what you modeled. So it's nice that we really kind of don't have to think about what's being filled out here. But for the first time, we'll see there's a heck of a lot more HERS forms that are going to be associated with our multifamily buildings. So now that we've gone through mechanical with you, we have a couple questions for you. Okay, my first question, at the system level, which tab are you going to use to support any adjustments you want to make to the fan energy? Because we got so many nice bells and whistles associated with this particular version of software. Where in the building tree do you model VRF systems? Select all that apply. Hint, hint, it might be more than one place. And then my last question for you, where can you import VRF equipment data from that's already been fully developed? Okay, Martyn, there's some confusion here about where I can make adjustments to fan energy. I think a lot of you were thinking about where you model fan energy, but this is all about the adjustments. Martyn, where do I model fan energy adjustments?
At the system level of the building tree, we specifically added a tab to the far right, and that is labeled pressure drop. That's explicitly what that's for.
And we tricked no one on this one. Where in the building tree do we model VRF systems? You could tell people are eager for this one, Martyn. They're ready.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, somebody wrote into the chat that they just did a building, and it was comfortably in compliance with using the VRF systems. So that's good news.
Yes, it very much is. We're so used to a new code cycle being scary when we hit the calculate button, and I kind of now look at it eagerly and go, let's see where we are today. I don't have a good feel yet on what those numbers are going to be. Are people getting that there are some great VRF sample projects for them to pull from, Martyn?
Yep, absolutely, absolutely. And I will give everybody, let everybody know, if you do find any of those sample files that are out of date and you're dealing with that particular manufacturer, maybe just put a bug in their ear to say, hey, you know, I was using these EnergyPro files, and maybe you guys want to update them with newer versions. I do have those guys keeping them updated. LG and Samsung are particularly good about that. They probably come to me about once a year and say, hey, we've got some new models and whatnot. But if you see anything out of date, just let us know and let them know.
Let's go back to our presentation and talk about water heating. What's new for water heating in this 2019 code cycle? Well, the one thing that they had integrated is our ability to use drain water heat recovery as an alternative to reducing the solar saving fraction of solar thermal systems. I really don't see myself using this at all to reduce my solar thermal number because that already is so low. If I've got one, those numbers are kind of so low, it's ridiculous. But I might use it for projects that need above code or really trying to stretch out how they're showing compliance with their different building features, so I might use it for that. So let's talk a little bit about how we go about modeling this. So again, we're going to go here to my zonal level, and this at my dwelling unit tab is where I'm going to put this shower drain water heat recovery. Martyn, walk us through what my options are.
Okay, so when you are modeling this feature, the assumption is that under each shower, you will install a heat recovery device. This heat recovery device, as the hot water goes down the drain and the cold water comes in, it will warm the cold water up. That cold water then has the option to feed to various sources. One source would be it feeds over to both the shower, cold water supply on the shower, and also back to the water heater. The second one is it just feeds back to the water heater, and the third one, it only feeds to the shower cold water. So the idea here is we're taking all that wasted hot water that's going out, we're recovering it, and using it to pre-warm that cold water stream. What you need, oops.
Sorry, you had to go backwards.
Sorry, my mistake. What I want to point out to you guys is, where'd it go?
There you go.
Yeah, sorry. Okay. So what you need to indicate are your shower feeds, okay, how many showers you've got, how many have a hot water heat recovery, drain water heat recovery, and the CSA rated efficiency. And CSA is some sort of Canadian something or other association.
Oh, you've impressed me up until this moment that you know what all of these stand for, Martyn. I'm just, I'm kind of not, I'm not impressed anymore.
I think it's probably Canadian Standards Association. Oh, no, it's a Canadian Shower Association. I've got it now.
Oh, yeah, you're trying to get yourself ahead of the game. Let's talk about central heat pump water heaters, Martyn. This is not something that's in the software yet. We're being told it's happening soon. What came out over the holidays was a prescriptive option to use central heat pump water heaters for our multifamily buildings. And this is becoming a pretty big deal for cities that are going all electric. So, and it's high-rise and hotel, motel, and low-rise residential. This is covering a lot of building types, almost all of them residential occupancies. There's more pages to this particular docketed report or document that give some diagrams of how to go about this prescriptively. It is pretty restrictive to the equipment type you can use. There's pretty much only 2 pieces of equipment that can meet the prescriptive requirements of this alternative option for central heat pump water heaters. But Martyn, what are we hearing is going to be happening with the software?
Well, if they're on time, I think Deanne said to us yesterday, in the next week or two, we should be seeing new versions of CVEC coming out, which will feed over to us, and you'll get new versions of EnergyPro, we'll be calling it 8.05, that will allow us to model the central heat pump water heaters. So that's actually pretty exciting news. It's unfortunate that it's only going to be called 8.05 because you're going to think of it as a minor update, but I consider that central heat pump water heater to be a major feature.
And I'm looking forward to seeing what happens when I can't meet all of the prescriptive efficiency requirements of the water heating systems and what type of flexibility options I might get. Or maybe they're going to say you only get to use certified equipment. We're back to only those two pieces of equipment. I have so many questions, and I'm so looking forward to getting this update to be able to play around with what's going on with central heat pump water heaters. So when we look at the performance form, I got to tell you currently right now, drain water heat recovery is not currently supported in the forms, but as we've been hearing, like hopefully we'll see with the fan pressure drop adjustments and also with drain water heat recovery, that is going to be included in the next round of the form. I do think the form does a beautiful job of indicating my central recirculating systems and the different types of controls that are in play. And there's so many different ways to do it, and I could take penalties by doing it the wrong way, or a lot of credit, especially for controls. I want to make sure they're right. We have one last check your understanding question with you guys today, and our question to you is going to be, how often should you update your compliance software? So Martyn, tell us about how EnergyPro is going to inform us there's an update we need to download.
Okay, so you guys can go into EnergyPro and go to Help and look at EnergyPro News, and we'll have announcements there. That on most people's computers, that should pop up automatically, unless your system's got it disabled on the automatic pop-ups. So that's, and we're also actually looking into having a check for updates done in the background every couple of days. So we're looking at increased ways to get you guys made aware of the updates. But I can't overstate the importance of the updates for you guys. I realize you're saying, oh, this is just too many updates. They're all coming to us at once, et cetera, et cetera. Well, you know, there's a lot of things being fine-tuned here at this stage in the code cycle. The non-residential prescriptive compliance forms, those are undergoing a lot of fine-tunings, tweakings, et cetera, et cetera. So there's been a lot of changes on those, and I got to admit, they're getting really good. They're looking much, much better than they were a month ago. But, you know, that's due to constant updates and whatnot that are occurring, you know, by the forms team. And as I've mentioned to you, you've got 8.05 coming out with some what I consider significant enhancements to the calculations.
Significant.
Yeah. And for the residential folks, they're getting the variable capacity heat pumps. So that's another great thing.
Mini ductless split heat pumps are a thing.
Yeah. And then you know, we've got another projected update that possibly, you know, end of March, which you know, we'll see what happens. But there's going to be more coming. So just you know, consider them all improvements and just pushing us in the right direction.
Let's go back to our presentation and let you know about some opportunities from further training through Energy Code ACE. That if you want to beef up a little bit more, I know Kim asked, hey, is there going to be any training about the unmet heating and cooling load hours? I can't think of one that speaks to that well, Martyn. Can you?
No, I absolutely cannot. I absolutely cannot think of anything that speaks to that.
So I might consider doing that as a decoding talk if I dive it into a little bit more and see what we can do to help support you guys in understanding that, with it being a whole new thing. Those of us who've been doing lead, we've been in that hell for decades. But now the rest of you get to join us.
Well, Gina, I think if you do that, you'll probably want to consider sitting down with a couple of case studies and then working through, okay, how do we go from point A to point B?
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. So when you come to our website and go to training, a few tips for you. Always go to the filter. It's always on the right-hand side. It's always here, and it helps reduce how much you're seeing. Here I'm filtering that the event type is going to be live, that I only want the 2019 standards. I don't want to see 2016. I don't want to see 2013. And then I'm going to go through this really long list of topics. I'm going to pick modeling. And you'll see a lot of options here, and I want Martyn to talk to you about why, even if you're a high-end user, you should consider taking the non-residential modeling class.
Well, what we'd like to do in these classes is we'd like to dust off the classes, refresh them for the new code, and really start to speak to topics surrounding the new code and whatnot. So even if you're an advanced user and whatnot, a lot of times there's a lot of stuff you really don't know about these codes, and we open it up to everybody asking various questions and that type of thing. So it's not like we stick to one topic. At least I don't when I do the training. I definitely go off on tangents where people want to guide the training classes. So even the most advanced people in our industry, there's always changes. There's always new stuff to learn. So this is the case with this code cycle.
These are done online. They're virtual classes, so you don't have to travel. So that makes these classes really attractive. We do also offer classes that are done through the training center. So this is where you can get EnergyPro specific training. There's advanced, there's intermediate, or there's advanced and intermediate, and then there's beginning. And those are all at your local training centers. You can go to your local training center calendar to find these classes, or you can go to Energy Code ACE. We support all of those classes being included in our calendar. Yesterday, we did just low-rise residential, single-family, low-rise multifamily, and duplexes. That will be available as a recording if you missed that and you'd like to catch it. Tomorrow, Brian Selby, who does a Code and Coffee YouTube type of training, shows you him over his shoulder actually how it goes about modeling a real project. He'll be doing a residential project in EnergyPro 8, especially if you want to get up to speed on PV and other various new features. What does that look like? That class will be tomorrow. We're going to have copies of our slides available, but only if you take my survey, because the survey is really important to how we show the CPUC, how we're using your ratepayer funds. So please take the time to take my survey and let us know how we can improve things. And let's end this with how you're going to get your certificate of compliance and take care of any questions we might not have dealt with already. All of you will get a certificate of compliance if you attended as a group. If you attended as a group, please email me the name and email addresses of everyone who were there so they can all get their very own copy of their certificate of completion. It does take us a few weeks to get the slides and the certificates out to you. It's not automatic. We are not EnergySoft. We are not software. We're people. We're real people, and it takes us time. You have my contact information. You have Martyn's contact information. Both of us, it's much easier to get a hold of us via email. Catherine and her team are the magic behind the curtain, and I just couldn't do this without them. Of course, we're going to show you that CEC hotline information one more time. Jill Marver at PG&E is the manager for the Decoding Talk series. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, do feel free to reach out to her directly. Whew. Martyn, are there any questions we have not taken care of? This is the end of our content. We ran a little bit late, but we want to make sure you walk out of here having all of your answers, all your questions answered. There we go. It's the end of a Thursday.
Well, Victoria had a great question, and I think it's on a lot of people's minds with all these darn updates coming out. If I permit a project in a particular version of EnergyPro, that stands. If I then 6 months later or a year later need to revise that project, I'm able to use the version I permitted in. Okay? It doesn't cancel out that original permitting in that version. And so the Energy Commission has been very clear on this over the years. This is not a new statement I'm making, by the way. And that is, okay, if you use 8.01 and you got it permitted, and a year later you're on 8.2, then yeah, you can go back and revise that project in 8.01, assuming you already applied for permit, obviously. Okay?
I have to tell you, though, almost always it's worth using the newer version. And why a lot of people didn't is because a lot of modeling regimes changed in the 2016 software especially. There was one big update that totally changed how we did some ventilation modeling. And so a lot of people wouldn't
Gina,
do it. But we found at Gabel, using the newer version, always gave us
Gina,
better
you're
numbers.
forgetting res HRVs. Right?
Oh,
Oh.
yeah. Okay, we're not going to go there. Okay, Nathaniel's asking, any tips on getting your runtimes down? You have to carefully look at your building and think about, I have a cake, and there are 10 people here who all want a piece. How am I going to cut this carefully so no one's gypped? Because if you give your older brother the smallest piece, you will never hear about it at the end of it through the rest of your life. That's exactly what you have to be thinking about when you take down the building model and put it into EnergyPro. Just like Martyn was saying, every system you add runtime. I find especially every zone you add, it kind of works out, you add about 3 minutes of runtime. Martyn and I see a lot of files where people do room by room as a zone. Each room is its own zone. And we're like, yeah, no wonder it takes 5 hours to run. Do you really need to break it down that much? You should be looking at what your ventilation systems are as your first cut. Then you look at what your lighting zones are as your second cut. And your last cut is going to then be the individual or separate mechanical systems. So think very carefully about how you're cutting up your building. Any other tips there, Martyn?
Multipliers. Multiply. Whenever you can, that's always great. If you're doing a multi-story building, we've got floor multipliers, so you can multiply up. So you could do one level of the building, and then you can multiply it up 16 times. Okay, you didn't increase your runtime one iota.
I have issues with that sometimes, Martyn. You have to make sure all your internal services exactly match up every time you use a multiplier, which isn't always
and it won't
the
let
case.
you, like, say here's a floor that's over the ground floor. If the top 16 floors are multiplied, it won't let you do that, right? So here's a little insider tip for you. Don't put it next to the downstairs floor. Just put it next to nothing. And then it won't trigger that message saying, hey, that's next to the downstairs floor. You can't multiply it. You still get your surface, interior surface that's needed, but you don't. You can still use your multipliers.
Sometimes you will sacrifice a little bit of compliance. I find when I can really say what the temperature conditions are on the other side of that space, let's say if it's an unconditioned space, it really does make a difference. So you have to just think how simple I can get without sacrificing compliance, and how am I still making sure my certificate of compliance makes sense. Always be thinking of that too when you're trying to simplify. Sure. Don't oversimplify so much that that NRCC form no longer speaks to the design set.
Well, and another thing about speeding up things, Wayne's got the right idea. We've just been going through our office and up computers, and we're putting in these new ones with the Intel series or Series 9 CPUs, i7 9th generation, and we're noticing some pretty significant performance improvements on them. SSDs on all the computers. High speed, 16 gigabytes of RAM, minimum spec, and it's a respectable improvement. So that's another way to go.
Martyn has seen my computers I give everyone in my office, and he always makes fun of me. I buy gaming laptops because I find that they're built pretty nicely for everything we need to do in running these CBEC files.
The next computer,
and they're fun to look at too.
in here is going to be a gaming machine that got at Costco. And I could care about gaming on it, but it runs the stuff fast, so hey, we'll take it.
Okay, this is your time to be asking questions. If you don't have questions, you can leave us. If you have questions, we're going to stick with you for a few more minutes and make sure everything is answered, because this is our very last decoding talk, and we want to make sure you're happy. If you're happy, we're happy. What is 2MH? You have to give us maybe more context, Wayne. Oh, Oh, Kim knows the answer. Oh, he's talking about outdoor lighting, mounting heights. Excellent. I'm like, out of context, I don't know. Kim, you are fast. I'm impressed.
Hey, Nathaniel, you missed the obvious advice I was giving you there, and that's go back and tell your boss you need a new computer.
I think that's what Wayne was
Just saying.
saying. We need better
Martyn Dodd
computers.
said it.
Ones that can also play Netflix movies at the same time we're working. Okay, I'm going to start wrapping this up. Martyn, thank you again for another tremendous run. I'm hoping you're going to take my color coding of your software to heart as you think about the future.
Yeah, I got some immediate stuff, though. I want to hit these heat pump water heaters once I actually get a hold of them and see how that's going to sort out. Because I haven't seen them yet, so I'm kind of curious how they fit into the mix.
Same here. I haven't seen them either. I've got itchy fingers. I want to see what the heck my results are going to look like and what I need to model. Okay. Goodbye, everyone. Have a